I thought she was kind of bad. I spent more time with her through the footage. My opinion kind of changed, and I realized, she's a human just like everybody else, and be like, yeah, this is a real person who might be doing something that you think is wrong. Might not be the right reason, but it's right to her.
Kind of wanted you to have the same experience that we had. At first you hate her, and then there's other times that you really like her, and then you hate her again, and then you like her, and then you hate her again.
When we found out that she had that history of taking care of special needs kids, it was really surprising.
I mean, ultimately, she has to be an interesting character. You're spending a lot of time with her, and I found her hard to watch. As the other stories kind of got interjected and you get to sort of go away from her story or see how it relates to other stories, she's definitely an interesting person, whether you like her or not.
Hi, I am Chad Anderson of Filmmaker U, filling in for Gordon Brickell. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify their skill set. You can learn more on filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at @filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional, and this week, we are pleased to be joined by editors Evan Wise, Doug Abel, Adrienne Gits, and Charles Divak, who work on the HBO documentary series Chimp Crazy. They've also worked on Into the Storm, Q Into the Storm on HBO, and The Anarchists. Welcome to the show, Evan, Charles, Adrienne, and Doug. We are really pleased to have you here with us today. I'm knee-deep in the show, and I'm kind of overwhelmed at every single episode of the series so far. I want to first ask how each of you really got started in both in Chimp Crazy, but more so in editing. I think people approach editing from a different perspective as they get into film and TV. What led you down the road towards editing? Anyone can start. Evan?
I was like a suburban skate punk when I was a kid, and I would make skate videos with my friends and snowboarding videos with my friends. And then I took a couple of film classes in high school and realized, oh, I just want to do this and I want to edit. And then I went to film school in New York. And when I got out, I started working in unscripted TV in New York. And that's taken me all the way to Chimp Crazy.
I was a history major in college. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And my senior year, I took one film class, and it was kind of amazing. Like as I was cutting it, I was doing an all-nighter to make this like kind of dumb mockumentary about a guy in a rabbit suit that I'm sure is a classic now in college. But as I was editing it, I noticed like it was 6 o'clock in the morning on like a Saturday morning now, and I looked outside and I saw all these people coming home for the fraternities, and and I felt like I was having like way more fun than they were at 6 a.m. On a Saturday night, and I was just like, I got to figure out how to do this as a job. So it all kind of shifted after that.
Yeah, I was in college and I took a class, and it was at a different building. It was at they owned my college owned the local or the public TV station and public like the NPR affiliate or whatever. Anyway, I remember walking in there and just instantly like feeling like I belonged there. And then I was part of a group project in this class that was like a filming TV production class, and nobody wanted to be the editor. And so I was like, oh, I'll do it. And I just remember just instantly just being in a edit bay, and like next thing I knew, like 15 hours had gone by. And I just sort of, I don't know if I would say I loved it, but I felt sort of compelled to do that and work like that. And it just kind of, I don't know, I just kept doing it.
Yeah, I grew up in New York in the 70s, and my best friend's parents were actually freelance filmmakers. And in fact, they worked on the early days of Sesame Street. I remember like Cookie Monster coaching a little girl about how to eat cookies and stuff. So it was like, they literally had a editing room in their spare bedroom in their Upper West Side apartment. So even when I was a kid, at 10, 11 years old, we had the rewinds and the little moviola thing, and we would just mess around with it, and we thought it was just really fun and made us giggle. And I mean, pretty much I caught the bug as a tween, I think, back then.
I grew up in a household in the projects in East Harlem. There's a program at WNET, the public television station, to get more people of color behind the camera, in the editing room, doing sound, writing scripts. When they put me in a dark room and they showed me how to use the splicer and the rewinds, I felt this big sigh of relief. this sense of, wow, I found my space. The editing part of filmmaking is the real nuts and bolts, what makes films come to life. You can ask Spielberg, you can ask Tarantino, you can ask Spike. When you sit here, this is where the proof is in the pudding. I'm Sam Pollard, and this is my class on documentary editing.
Yeah, I have a lot of stories comparable to you in terms of coming from college and coming into that things. I do want to talk to Evan for the entire rest of the time about 90s skate videos, but I won't because I do want to talk about Chimp Crazy.
We can talk
tell
later.
Tell me about Tanya and the objective of portraying Tanya. Was there some goal that you had in mind in terms of how Tanya should be? Should she be sympathetic? Should she be a villain? Should she be what role should Tanya play? And how did that interpret into the editing of the series?
When I first met her, I thought, oh, she seems interesting and she's doing something that I think is bad. And I thought she was kind of bad. And then as I spent more time with her through the footage, my opinion kind of changed. And I realized, she's a human just like everybody else. And I think that was really conscious to get past the sensationalism and be like, yeah, this is a real person who might be doing something that you think is wrong, but she has a reason for doing it. And it might not be the right reason, but it's right to her. And we really wanted to show kind of all sides of her and not just villainize her.
One of the things that Evan hit on was like, we kind of wanted you to have the same experience that we had as we were getting to know her, right? So at first you hate her, and then there's other times that you really like her, and then you hate her again, and then you like her, and then you hate her again. And so we were trying to kind of make that happen in the series and try to flesh her character out and kind of give all sides of her. And I think particularly what Adrienne did in episode 3, where we kind of talked about her backstory a bit and like how she was taking kids in. I think that kind of, it gave more context to her, that it kind of made you like her a little bit more, at least kind of understand where she was coming from.
Yeah, and that was surprising to all of us, I think, when we found out that information, that she had that history of taking care of special needs kids. It was really surprising.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, she has to be an interesting character. You're spending a lot of time with her. So whether you like her or don't, I certainly had not a great reaction when I first saw her. And I found her, kind of hard to watch. But as the other stories kind of got interjected and you get to sort of go away from her story or see how it relates to other stories, she's definitely an interesting person, whether you like her or not, or whether your opinion's changing. And so that was key. A key element is just how do we kind of keep her interesting, I think.
So in terms of that, when you talk about learning about her and experiencing her, were you editing while the shooting was still happening, or had that all completed and gone on, or were you getting new information as things went on and you were sort of like following along sort of with the audience?
I was the first person on in the edit, and I started about a month after Tonka was removed from Tanya's basement. And after that, we didn't have any contact with Tanya for a couple of months, and then we reconnected and ended up filming with her for another year and a half. So for the majority of the edit, we were still shooting and still filming with Tanya. So yeah, there was new stuff happening, and we were learning new information and thinking about other avenues of questioning to ask her to reveal some things that we thought were interesting.
Yeah, there was one interview that we did towards the end of the series, and I remember I asked like, oh, could we get something where she's kind of like meditating or like closing her eyes, like, because all the interviews were like kind of sit downs where we were asking her point blank, and this is towards the end, and I thought like maybe we could get, I didn't know where we were going to use it, but maybe we could get something about like her reflecting on her experience or just kind of talking about it. And this was probably towards the very end of the series, and it came in, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I don't really know how to use this, but this is awesome. And then Doug ended up cutting like a really amazing cold open for episode 4 with that material.
Because you have some of this that's shot, during this whole process, but then you have a lot of archival footage. You're dealing with a lot of different old photos and old videos and old things. Was there a careful idea of balancing that? Was there a careful idea of looking at that and saying, hey, we're talking too much about the past, we need to come back to Tanya? There seems to be, as I watch the show, a lot of times that we're talking about backstories, we're talking about other things, and then it's like, oh, by the way, Tanya's still dealing in this moment here. And there's kind of this playful back and forth of like, oh, don't forget, she's still dealing with this here. How did you kind of address that?
I feel like that was a constant pendulum. Don't you guys? Like, it was, I could remember at least, in 103 feeling, it'd be like, oh wait, we're with Tanya for way too long. We need to, I feel like that was just a constant tweaking of that balance.
Yeah,
right.
You'd get a jonesing to catch back up with Tanya, because there are stretches where you leave her for quite a bit of time. So it was a constant sort of problem, I guess, or puzzle. But yeah, I mean, kind of where it ended up, there was enough of her story spread out through the 4 episodes that it, I think by design it became a little bit easier to manage. But yeah, no, constant problem. Like, where's Tanya? Where's
Yeah,
Tanya?
and in some episodes, like Chuck in 102, there's so much was happening with Tanya. I mean, there were so many like amazing scenes in there with Tanya. Where in 103 her story was a little less forward moving. Until the end, really. Like, it was more just her spending time with Tonka in the basement. So, but like in 2, like there was the amazing, Zoom call, cliffhanger, all kinds of stuff was happening.
For 2, definitely the calibration of Travis and the Tanya Tonka story was definitely that took a while to kind of figure out. And like our archival team found this like trove of archival kind of at like the 11th hour. Most of that Travis video was just like discovered at like kind of the last minute. And then so with that, they ended up shooting some more interviews and kind of opening that whole section up. Like, we had everything locked pretty much, and then we cracked it back open and went through everything. And there was so much material, and it was all really compelling. And the first cut I did of that was like, I think it was like 30 minutes of Travis material. And we all like watched it together in a screening, and we were all like, this is good, but it's way, way, way too much. And so we kind of sculpted it down, got it down to about 15 to 20 minutes. And it was just really trial and error of all of us kind of like watching each other's cuts and helping each other try to like find that area where what's too much to go away and what's not, and where can we land so that we can still drive all the stories forward.
You talked about what these side stories, Travis, for example, in episode 2, and then Buck in episode 3. You do an interesting job of kind of setting up the stakes, using these kind of as moral lessons of like, hey, this is what can happen, this is what can go wrong. Was that conscious, like from the beginning, that you were going to reference these stories, or was that just like, hey, we need something to explain to the viewer the level of danger that these animals possess?
It wasn't planned in the beginning, and some of those were shot before we even knew who Tanya was. Like, initially, when Good Films was out on production, they were just looking for anybody with a chimpanzee, and they had really good footage, but we were kind of looking at it like, all right, this is cool, but how does it fit? And then eventually we realized that there's all of these chimpanzee stories almost run the same parallel with each other, where something, the chimp gets too big, something bad happens, and then it unfortunately dies. So then it became like, okay, well, how can we weave these together and use them as a precautionary tale, or as like to foreshadow what's going to happen?
With Travis, where I think it was important because we all knew that Tonka was in her basement, right? And so you need to really impact, once we got to that point, but you need the viewer to know that like a 250-pound chimpanzee in your basement is super, super dangerous, right? Like, it's not, and so Travis was super important to that, to at least like lay down the context that like this isn't a normal thing and it could go very badly.
Unfortunately, the stories are so similar in a way. So to be able to eke out sort of different aspects or different lessons. In fact, there was a whole other story that I think we ended up dropping, or at least part of a story, because it was just sort of like too much, sort of started to become one note. So yeah, how to, especially, episode 3, Adrienne did a great job sort of threading the needle with how to kind of make the story seem to connect with what we're learning, and so it doesn't feel like, kind of like, okay, here's another tragic chimp story. They all had aspects that certainly through the editing and also through the filming, we would sometimes request, hey, could you really we want to do a deep dive into this aspect, and they would get an interview for us, and then be like, oh great, we can dig into that quite a bit. So that was another challenge.
That happened with Chuck and I a lot with Sandy and Tamara's story, because they were so similar, or at least their pathology was so similar. Like we'd be like, oh, Buck's story and Travis's story, like there's so many things that they have in common. We have to kind of decide, where we bring certain things up.
And I think when you boiled the B stories down, episode 2 in Travis is about danger and fear. Episode 3 with Buck is about pressure. And then the Chance Travis story in episode 4 is about loss. So then you can kind of remove everything from the story that doesn't relate to those emotions, and it helps keep things fresh while they may take a similar track.
So going into this, was Tanya intended always to be the central story, or was that a discovery? So that was just, you went out and found stuff, and then was like, oh, this is where, this is the golden story that we found in kind of all this mess.
Yeah, that's like the way it's portrayed in the show is the way it happened. They were shooting other chimpanzee people, and they found Connie, and they were really interested in Connie, and they showed up to Connie's place, and she didn't want to talk, but Tanya did.
Because it really, I mean, you found that's your, I guess our protagonist or antagonist. It was a solid discovery.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
In terms of dealing with the subject matter, there is a level where, I mean, right off the bat in the first episode, you talk about the woman nursing the chimpanzee from her own breast, and right off the bat, I'm like, okay, what level of crazy are we going to get into? Was there a point at which you consider, like, do we go full throttle on the crazy, or do we pull back from the crazy? And how, like, was there other stories in here that are more crazy that just got more ridiculous and insane, or did you lay it all out there in terms of no holds barred?
I think we were pretty pedal to the metal with crazy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything that didn't make it that was more out there, but I mean, there was a storyline where we filmed with one of Connie's neighbors, and he had there was a chimpanzee that escaped in the early 2000s and came on his property, and he ended up shooting 2 of them and killing one of them. And that's pretty crazy. We didn't end up using that.
Just sometimes things maybe felt a little, maybe like they felt almost staged, because they were, just putting Tanya in, catching her in a situation, and sometimes it would maybe come across a little stagey. So we didn't, want to kind of take the audience out by having that feeling. So I think there's probably a couple, I'm thinking of the miniature golf scene in particular, where it was just sort of like, I think this pulls the audience out rather than drawing them in. So, but I wouldn't say crazy with a capital K. I think most of the really bonkers stuff is in.
Eric Good, the director, really kind of pushes you to put in as much crazy stuff as possible. And so we were always kind of like, if we can justify it from a story standpoint, then we'll put it in. I think was kind of what we all tried to do. So
on a collaborative edit like this, how do you approach the workflow in terms of doing stuff? Is it each of you doing a separate episode, or each of you doing a separate part, or is it overlapping, or first pass, second pass kind of ideas? I'm always curious about how editors work together.
It was sort of a strange process, because Evan started quite early on and had really done a fantastic pass on these on all these scenes that, you know, he had access to the footage. And so we had a bunch of like, oh wow, these are some great scenes that maybe don't connect quite yet, but it was something that we knew to build towards. But in terms of, yeah, working, we all kind of came on different times. And I mean, Evan, I think, was probably over, you know, as a first man on. He kind of probably had a better sense of, you know, where to direct our energies. But I mean, it did end up more or less falling upon episode. You know, okay, you know, I ended up working on the last episode. I'm not really sure kind of how that happened. It just sort of evolved that way.
I was the first person on, so I cut the first episode, and then I cut up just like a bunch of scenes, like Doug said, that weren't really attached to anything, but were just really interesting. And then a lot of those ended up kind of living in various places. Chuck was the second person on, so he helped me with one for a little bit, and then he took on two. Adrienne was third, and she took three, and Doug was fourth, and he took the fourth episode. But we also, I mean, as always happens when you make a documentary, things move. So inevitably, scenes that someone cut move into somebody else's episode, and we were always helping each other out and sharing notes and sharing ideas. And like, there's so many times where I would send an email. It's like, hey, check your bin from me. There's a little thing that I saw randomly while I was looking in the footage, and it'll really help out this other episode. So we all had our hands kind of across the whole series. But like, when you actually have to get down and like finish stuff, it's like everyone eventually takes one episode and focuses on that to bring it home.
And then Evan, you did a pass on everything.
Yeah, as a supervising editor, I did a pass on the series. Like,
and also we had a great story editor. As a fellow you worked with before, Tim Moran, who was also helpful because you get so deeply entrenched in your episode. You sometimes are thinking, wait, is this going to track? Or something happens in the other episode and you're not even aware because it's, you know, it's been a couple of weeks since we screened it together and or screen that episode. And so he was great at kind of saying, no, you're barking down the wrong tree because that's not going to pay off or people are going to be confused. So that was probably more helpful on this particular series than anything I had worked on, I think, because it was complex and a lot of sort of a lot of moving parts. So that was great having him to kind of throw in his 2 cents every now and then.
I do want to talk about episode 2 because episode 2 for me really spelled out this idea of the participants, or the creators, the documentarians involved in doing this as being part of the story. They do start to become part of the story because they're there, and you know they're there, and they're involved in what's happening, and you start to see how when they interact with Tanya, and it starts really in episode 1, but really it comes to kind of fruition in episode 2 of this idea of that they are along for this ride. And I know that for a lot of people, for a lot of documentarians, they look at, hey, I want to be, you know, fly on the wall, removed from this whole thing. And then some say, hey, I'm in the middle of this. And because of permissions and because of Connie's reluctance and Tanya's acceptance, you know, they became this kind of, hey, can we get this story? I have to show how to pull the story out of Tanya, or how to pull the story out of wherever it was. Was that a conscious thing going on as you were working in terms of keeping the documentarians in the story or out of the story, or making reference to them being like, no, they're in the room too?
We didn't really have a choice. Like, I don't think there's any way to tell the story without including them in it. I mean, I would advise any documentarian, don't put yourself in your footage or your film, but we had to. And I think it's like the only honest way to do it in our case. And there's like, when I came on, one of the things I said is, we have to shoot more behind the scenes stuff in case we want it. So we ended up shooting a lot more of that stuff. But I think we all figured out after getting through it that like a lighter hand, like the absolute minimum amount of our team involved in the show made the show better.
Yeah.
But it was an endless, I mean, I don't think there was anything we maybe sort of discussed more than that. Like, how do we, because it's, in a way, it's not that interesting, but it was vital to sort of understanding what was happening in the film. And so, yeah, just finding the balance of just the sort of the least amount that keeps them in the story, or keeps you aware of it. You know, it's interesting because the filming for this actually began with the filming of Tiger King. It goes back that far. And if you watch Tiger King, you do see Eric briefly at the beginning, and he pretty much, I mean, you'll hear his voice every now and then, but he pretty much disappears for the whole series. So I think, I don't think it was really a desire to be in it. I just think it was kind of the subject matter we were just entwined. And then it became kind of like well, this is an interesting kind of like, fourth wall problem. It's like, how do you sort of have the audience understand why things are happening and the pressures behind it. So I think we struck a pretty good balance on that in the end.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's if you watch, say, a reality TV show, there's often these moments that are people living out in the wild trying to survive, and there's a camera crew there, and there's a camera crew there. So as an audience member, okay, well, they're not lost, they're not missing, they're not there because the camera crew is there. In this, you are spelling it out. You're saying, no, we are acknowledging that there is a camera crew there, and everything that is happening in kind of crime, if it were, are happening in front of a camera crew, which is and then you proceed to talk about it as an idea in episode 3 of like, no, this is like, why would you talk to us about this? What you're doing is wrong, and would you do it again? And the other guy whose name I don't remember was like, yeah, no, I understand, yeah, but I'll do it again. And so it's I think it's part of that truthfulness of saying, no, these people are really doing this and being this way as an idea. I do want to end with one final question in terms of that we always ask all of our guests. Do you have a guilty pleasure, something that you watch for entertainment or fun, maybe silly or embarrassing, something you do to unplug at the end of a long work day, a long edit session that just kind of resets your brain?
I have seen Point Break a lot.
The original or the new one?
No, the original one. I did see the new one in theaters, and the only reason why I walked out was out of respect for the ghost of Kathleen Bigelow. But yeah, the original one with Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves.
I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, so I don't know that I particularly like it, but they really like Lego Jurassic World, which is there was only one season. There are 16 episodes, of which I've seen probably 100 times each. And they just love it, and they'll watch it over and over again. And honestly, just like watching it with them it's just really refreshing. It's a funny show. It's silly, but just their love for it is I really enjoy.
It's really interesting. There will be shows that for my kids, that like movies and TV shows that I remember that are just like important to me, even though I didn't think they were great, but they're important to me because that was their first Disney movie, or that was their first thing. I'm sorry, Doug, guilty pleasure.
Guilty pleasure, anything with potty humor, Amy Schumer, anything really gross or silly like that, I'm in.
Yeah,
Adrienne?
I would have to say this is embarrassing as an adult, and I may regret this, but Outer Banks. I just finished all the seasons of Outer Banks. Do you guys even know what it is? Like,
I do.
I know what it is.
I haven't watched, but I understand.
It's just teen drama at its best.
It always feels good. Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm excited to see what else you're going to do, or what animal might be next. Who knows? It's been kind of wild. I've been watching it with my children, which I'm not sure is a good or bad thing.
You might want to rethink that one.
Yeah.
How old are they?
They're 11 and 12 and 12. So
twins.
They're okay. Yeah, twins. Anyway, that's gonna be it for us this week. You can check us out at filmmakeru.com or follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. My name is Chad Anderson. I want to thank again Doug, Abel, Adrienne Gits, Evan Weiss, and Charles Divak from Chimp Crazy. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and good luck.